He is one of the world's influential Muslims, the spiritual leader of 20 million Ismailis, friend of prime ministers and presidents, and someone who rarely shies away from dealing with the issues that confront the world, whether they concern conflict, development, or religion. This week, to talk about all of them, he's our guest. Hello, I'm Peter Mansbridge. One-on-one today with His Highness the Aga Khan. You must love Canada. You keep coming back here.
I do.
Let me go a little deeper on that, because it raises a question you have often raised, and that's the issue of ignorance. You reject the theory of a clash of civilizations or even a clash of religions. You believe there's a clash of ignorance here on both sides of that divide. And you felt that way for a long time. I was looking through the transcripts of an interview you gave in the 1980s in Canada, where you were warning the West that it had to do a better job in trying to understand Islam. That clearly hasn't happened.
No, it hasn't happened, and a number of friends and people in important places have tried to contribute to solving that problem, but it's a long-established problem, and it's going to take, I think, several decades before we reach a situation where the definition of an educated person includes basic understanding of the Islamic world. And that hasn't been the case. And the absence of that basic education has caused all sorts of misunderstandings, but above all, the inability to predict statehood, international affairs, economic affairs are often predicated on the ability to predict. If you don't know the issues or the forces at play, the ability to predict is severely constrained.
What's been the resistance, do you think?
I think essentially historic. I think that the Judeo-Christian societies have developed their own education over decades and more. And basic knowledge on the Islamic world has simply been absent. And if you look at what was required education in the 80s, for example, I was a student in the US, basic education on the Islamic world was absent, even on general courses on the humanities, for example.
Is this a one-sided clash of ignorance? I mean...
No, I think there's ignorance on both sides, and I think very often there's confusion. I think more and more there's been confusion between, for example, religion and civilization. And that's introducing instability in the discussion, frankly. I would prefer to talk about ignorance on the civilizations of the Islamic world, rather than ignorance just on the faith of Islam.
What we've witnessed in the last couple of years, not just in this country, but in other Western countries as well, is what we call homegrown terror, where you see young Muslim men, educated, born in the West, educated in the West, who are moving towards, a fundamentalist view, a militant view of Islam. Why is that happening?
Well, there is, without any doubt, a growing sense amongst Muslim communities around the world that there are forces at play that it doesn't control, but which does view the Muslim world with, let's say, unhappiness or more. I would simply say, however, that if you analyze the situation, I don't think you can conclude that all Muslims from all backgrounds are part of that phenomenon. Secondly, if you go back and look at that, you will find that a lot of the causes of those communities are people where there's a long-standing, unresolved political crisis. It's very, very risky, I think, to interpret these situations as being specific to the faith of Islam. It is specific to peoples, sometimes ethnic groups, but it's not specific to the faith of Islam.
Well, that must really concern you. You're your followers believe in you, see you as a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, the same prophet that some of these minority fundamentalist militant groups hold up and claim as the reason they're doing the acts they're doing?
Again, I think one has to go back and say, what is the cause of this situation? With all due respect, if you look at the crisis in the Middle East, that crisis was born at the end of the First World War. The crisis in Kashmir was born through the freedom of the Indian continent. These are political issues originally, they're not religious issues. You can't attribute the faith of Islam to them. I think the second point I would make is this tendency to generalize Islam. There are many different interpretations of Islam. As a Muslim, if I said to you that I didn't recognize the difference between a Greek Orthodox or a Russian Orthodox or a Protestant or a Catholic, I think you'd say to me, but you don't understand the Christian world. Well, let me reverse that question.
I hear you.
Yali welcome, bienvenue. My name is Zain and welcome to tonight's Friday Night Reflections. Wherever you are in this country, whether you're here in Alberta like me or any other part of Canada, welcome to tonight's Friday Night Reflections. Thank you for taking time out of your Friday and joining us. You know, this is the period of the show where I jump right into it and I'm supposed to joke about something, supposed to make a joke about either my painting behind me or the elephant statue or giving you a tour of my home office, all of which I've done in the past, or maybe commenting on this plant. But instead, what I will say is thank you for having me again. It is my third time hosting Friday Night Reflections, and I know I'm going to be doing much better than last week's host. Also a fellow Calgarian, also someone who had aspirations to be on Friday Night Reflections, but they've shut him out again after his mediocre job last week. What was his name? I'm just going to check here. Nahid Nenshi. So I'm so glad that you get someone much better than the young upstart Nahid Nenshi who hosted the program last week. You know, all joking aside, and that was a joke, by the way, just so we are totally clear, I want to talk about today's topic, and a very serious topic. You know, today's topic is an important one and an interesting one, especially in the world that we live in today, and it's Islamophobia. You know, this is not a topic that has uprooted itself ever since 9/11. Frankly, this isn't a topic that's been around starting at 9/11. This has been, you know, long creeping into the historical zeitgeist of North America for a long time, specifically, you know, in the Western world more broadly. And today's topic and today's speaker really try to dissect what's happening, allow us to figure out how we combat it, how we combat this intolerance, both as individuals and as a community, and identify markers of practice of pluralism, the antidote against Islamophobia, but also discrimination writ large against individuals of other faiths as well. So to kick us off today, before we jump into our interview, I'd like to welcome Chairman Dr. Kabir Jivraj. Dr. Kabir Jivraj is the chairman of the Ismaili Tariqa and Religious Education Board. He's going to be providing to us some opening comments regarding, you know, the way we find ourselves today as human beings trying to pray and practice our faith in this pandemic era. So without further ado, Dr. Kabir Jivraj.
My dear brothers and sisters, Yali Madad. We're all living in a time of challenge and worry. Many members of the Jamaat are trying to make sense of our world in our current circumstances. Alhamdulillah, with the grace of Maulana Hazir Imam, our Jamaat in Canada has wonderful support from institutions, from governments, and from one another. And of course, we're constantly under the care of our beloved Imam Zaman. At these times, faith is often a source of strength and comfort. Community is how we get through challenging times. And now that togetherness feels different, feels unfamiliar, but it is present nonetheless. Our faith, our unity as one Jamaat does not diminish in these times. But how it may manifest itself has changed for the moment. It is in this context that I wanted to share with the Jamaat some reflections about faith in staying connected to our tariqah during times of difficulty. In particular times in which we cannot attend Jamaat Khana as frequently as we might like, or gather in prayer like we used to. Throughout history, there have been periods of time when the Ummah has been forced to stay away from our places of prayer. In the time of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, followers were instructed to pray from home during severe cold and heavy rains. The adhan or call to prayer was modified to tell believers that they should not gather, but rather to pray from their own homes. More recently, Jamaats from around the world have had to pray privately in their homes for many reasons. This private practice, while different from congregational prayer, is not in any way a lesser form of practice. Indeed, for a tariqah like ours, the element of personal search is a fundamental tenet of who we are. The distinction between private practice of saying prayers as a family or as individuals in our homes and the notion of communal prayer in the Ismaili tradition is very different. In our tariqah, that is in the Ismaili tariqah, a Jamaat Khana is the place where the community gathers, where we often find peace and solace. It is the designated space for Shia Ismaili Muslims to perform tariqah practices. And it was therefore with heavy hearts and deep sadness that we had to close Jamaat Khanas earlier this year in response to the COVID-19 crisis. It was our beloved Hazrat Imam's guidance that we comply with public health guidelines around the world. Our Jamaat Khanas are our place of safety. They're our home, and we miss our getting together as one Jamaat to pray together, to celebrate together, to share a cup of chai together. But just because the form of our togetherness must change, it does not mean we can't be together. We continue to remain connected with the Jamaat just as we are tonight on Friday Night Reflections through webinars, seniors programs, BUI, and many, many more programs both online and by phone. Some of you have asked if we can establish virtual Jamaat Khanas or conduct our tariqah practices online. First, we all know that no virtual space can replicate the sense of belonging that we feel when we're physically together. Moreover, it is important for us to remember that it is our beloved Imam Zaman's prerogative alone to establish Jamaat Khanas or to direct changes to our tariqah practices. Indeed, in a message from LIF Chairman Malik Talib, which included a talika from our beloved Hazrat Imam, Chairman Malik noted, the temporary closure of our Jamaat Khanas has resulted in the appearance of electronic and digital channels offering a virtual Jamaat Khana. This is clearly inappropriate, as a Jamaat Khana may only be established and function under the Imam's authority through his institutions and appointed Mukhi Kamadiyas. While many of us may wish to take advantage of technology to pray with others outside our immediate family, that begins to enter the realm of communal prayer. It is ultimately our beloved Imam's prerogative alone as to when, where, and how we may gather for communal prayers. Whether we talk about learning about our faith or whether we talk about the practice of our tariqah, let us remember that the experience we're living right now is not a new one for many in our Jamaat. We have examples in our history of how our forefathers have dealt with times like this before. First example that deals with learning about our esoteric faith. During the Fatimid period, Ismailis used to participate in Majalis al-Hikmah, sessions of wisdom, under the guidance of the Imam of the time. These were closed sessions held at specially designated places to learn about and practice their own interpretations of faith, which were accessible only to those who had pledged their allegiance to the Imam. Even in those times, it is recorded that there were exceptional circumstances under which the Imam of the time Imam Hakim B. Umbrella suspended these gatherings. A second example that deals with the rites and practices of our tariqah. As most of you are probably aware, our brothers and sisters in Tajikistan lived for generations without the blessing of Jamaat Khanas. But they maintained a deep strength of faith by practicing and remembering daily from their homes, and kept discreetly in their homes remembrances of the tariqah and the imam. They turned inward to seek solace and to pray discreetly, quietly, but without wavering. Let us be inspired by their strength and take this opportunity to remember what our beloved Imam has often told us, that our tariqah is an esoteric tradition, a tradition in which personal spiritual search is paramount. We're so blessed. Last week, our beloved Hazrat Imam sent a talika to his worldwide Jamaat. He reminded us that he is aware of his spiritual children's circumstances, and he sent his blessings for good health, happiness, safety, and well-being of all his murids. Ameen. Confident that our Imam's love and care is always with us, let us keep our faith strong and act in accordance with the wishes of our beloved Imam, and focus on our inner search, focus on reaching out to those who are isolated and marginalized, seek to learn more about our faith, and pray each day as individuals and families for return to safety and for mushkil asan. Ameen. Let us also remain optimistic and hopeful. We have seen advances in science that continue to give us hope and confidence in a return to normalcy soon. Alhamdulillah, in some regions, we have been able to reopen Jamaat Khanas in compliance with our provincial health guidelines. However, more recently, with rising numbers across the country, we've actually had to reduce the number of Jamaati members that can attend Jamaat Khana on any given day. Please rest assured, we're monitoring the trends closely so as to ensure the safety of our Jamaat. This is a wonderful time for us to reflect on our blessings, to reflect on the opportunity that this period brings us, to connect with our families, to take the time to learn, to read, to expand our skills, and to prepare for the future with strength. When I had the privilege of addressing the Jamaat at Laylatul Qadr, I had quoted Maulana Hazrat Imam's Taknashini address, in which our beloved Imam said, and I quote again, "The years of development and change which lie ahead are certain to throw up many new problems. We should not be afraid of these. You will surely surmount them if you stand by your faith and meet your difficulties in the spirit of humility and tolerance that your religion demands of us. This is especially important for the younger generations who will have to carry the future on their shoulders. Only the faith of your fathers can sustain you and enable you to live in peace here in this world and the next. I wish you all safety, good health, happiness, and mushkil asan. Ameen." This remains ever true today. We have faced adversity as a Jamaat and as humanity before. But with faith, with hope, and with our beloved Imam's blessings, we will come through this period. Inshallah, united, stronger, and more hopeful as a Canadian Jamaat. Ameen.
Well, thank you, Chairman Saib, for those wonderful comments on an incredibly complex topic, how we practice our faith in this pandemic era. It is now time to introduce to you our speaker for tonight's Friday Night Reflections. You know, this is the part of the show that I like the best. I get to introduce people that are smarter than me, and then I get to talk to them and try to keep up with what they're saying. So it's a test in many ways, but we're in for a treat. We are in for a real treat, because tonight's speaker is not just a leader in his domain within our Jamaat, he's a leader in his domain across North America. Eboo Patel is one of the leading thinkers on interfaith pluralism in North America. Let me just read you some of this bio. He was a member of President Barack Obama's inaugural Advisory Council on Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. He's the founder and president of the Interfaith Youth Corps, a Chicago-based international nonprofit which aims to promote interfaith cooperation. He was named by U.S. News and World Report as one of America's best leaders of 2009. He's also a Rhodes Scholar, of course he is, having studied his doctorate in sociology of religions. He's also authored several books, his most recent one called Acts of Faith, which, by the way, I want to talk to you about after my interview with Eboo, so keep that in mind. I'll talk to you about Acts of Faith after the interview. He's also spoken at several forums, the Clinton Global Initiative, the TED Conference, the Nobel Peace Prize Forum. So I guess all I'm trying to say is that he's incredibly mediocre and underwhelming. I'm just kidding. You know, introducing this topic and introducing my conversation with Eboo is a musical piece, and a powerful musical piece by Calgary artist Dr. Bijan Lalani. You know, this was a piece that Bijan wrote in 2015 on the heels of the Paris terrorist attacks, and has a real resonance and a real fit with our topic today as we talk about interfaith pluralism, Islamophobia, and the place we find ourselves in, not just as a community, but as individuals in our modern zeitgeist. So without further ado, please help me welcome the musical piece by Dr. Bijan Lalani, followed by my conversation with Eboo Patel.
You were not me, so don't claim to be. 'Cause that label that hangs from me painfully, you were not me, should be plain to see. But you call out my name just so angrily. I know it's all scripted with victims, it's vicious. Give us your victims and call us the killers. You play the system to make us the villains. How can you kill a man and call it religious? Mothers, children, burnt down buildings, more scared of dying than they're thankful for living. You kill Muslims without any affliction. You attack Paris with no inhibitions. So swing swords, test our conviction. Call yourself Muslim or Jewish or Christian, but don't think we're foolish enough that we'll listen. When we lost lives, you lost religion. You can twist words and quote the Quran, but I know for sure this is not Islam. So the next time you go on and mention a God, pray for forgiveness and pray we move on. They are not me. Please believe. I live with intentions of peace. They are not me, though they seem to be. It's just what they want you to see. I'm a Canadian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a student. I love life, I love friends, I love music. I fall in love and girls drive me stupid. I want to live life to the fullest and truest. They want you to fear us, they want to divide. They want us to hate so that we pick sides, but we are the same, we are alive. And if we're together, they cannot survive. Only light can drive out the dark. Only love can quell the hate that tears us apart. We're brothers and sisters, so don't let them strip us of the humanity we hold in our hearts.
Eboo, thank you so much for joining me here today. This is a real pleasure to have this conversation. You know, let's start with a question that might be on some people's minds. You know, you've been one of the most passionate advocates for pluralism, and particularly religious pluralism in the United States today. And some of the events, if I can just call them that we've seen in the United States over the past couple of years, kind of spilling over here into Canada, have kind of tested the robustness or the tolerance of religious pluralism. Do these developments kind of fill you with optimism of what could emerge on the back end, or where do you kind of stand on your current sense of hopefulness for religious pluralism in North America?
Well, first of all, Zain, Yali Madat, and thank you so much for having me. I'm totally thrilled to be with you, and I'm honored that you invited me. Thank you. This past week has been, joyous. And the way that President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have conducted themselves, the language, the kind of the song that they have sung to the nation and the world, it's a song of pluralism. Embrace differences, bridge divides, enhance the areas of common ground, focus on shared values, do practical projects together. Let's nurture a common life with one another. That's the song that they're singing.
That's beautiful. You've opened up so many threads that I want to go down on, but let me get to the Obama side of things and your work for President Obama as well shortly. I want to talk to you a little bit about this intervening period we've been through, and I would kind of love to get your understanding or dissection as to how, with the tremendous amount of work done post 9/11 to try to bridge this divide, how you saw these fractures still present in 2016 that someone may have exploited politically politically. But what do you kind of think is the diagnosis, so to speak, of what has led to certain degrees to this rise of Islamophobia, coupled with the rise of anti-Semitic behavior at the same time, and sort of overall religious bigotry? Is there a diagnosis that you have in your mind that's kind of allowed these fractures that may have existed to keep being pounded upon by certain Americans or North Americans?
Well, I do think that there is a perfect storm of unfortunate events here. And I think the biggest part of the storm is a massive economic transition, right? From an industrial society to a knowledge society, from a nation where you could, make a living in rural America or exurban America to a nation that is really based now in cities. And there was an economic report done 2014, something like that highlighted that virtually all of the benefits of the economic recovery, the post 2009 2010 economic recovery, went to people with college degrees. The kind of famous study that showed that white working class folks actually had a lower life expectancy over the past 10 years than they had the decades before. I think it indicates that an entire way of life is gone. And there's not just economic dimensions to that, there's cultural dimensions to that way of life. And I think that that's probably the biggest factor. So I think that there is a structural transition taking place that those of us who are highly educated and live in cities and have knowledge sector jobs, we frankly paid very little attention to. And that's bad on us.
You mentioned your work, so let's jump into that. You're someone with some incredibly impeccable credentials that my parents wish I had. But you've Rhodes Scholar, you've worked for President Obama. But before we kind of get into those elements, what's driven you to this line of work? What's kind of driven you to kind of hone in on pluralism and then kind of double click into religious pluralism as kind of the strengthening sort of catalyst of society? I'd love to kind of hear what drove you to this particular path.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. So I wrote a book about this. This is the subject of my first book, Acts of Faith, and it's kind of the story to me going from being an angry activist around diversity work when I was in college in the early to mid 1990s to finding my way into kind of a hope-filled activist approach through religious inspirations, the first of which, as a young adult, were actually not Islam or the Ismaili interpretation of Islam. They were the Catholic worker movement and Abraham Joshua Heschel's vision out of Judaism, et cetera, et cetera. And then the more I kind of traveled that path, the more that I realized that within the tradition of my birth and within the leadership of Maulana Hazrat Imam and within the kind of character and contributions of the Ismaili community was a vision that not only lived in my bones because I'd grown up, with salawat and dua and ginans, et cetera, but also a vision that was unbelievably intellectually inspiring. So in any case, Acts of Faith is kind of my path towards that. But this idea that in the words of the great poet William Blake, we are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love, and that love is defined by people of different identities coming together and building positive things together. Like that's just lives in my heart, and it lives within every pore of my body, and I just want to be involved in like making that real. And I love building things. I love building things, and this is what I've been building for 20 years.
You mentioned history there, so I want to maybe take a step back from talking about modern times to history for a second. What is religious pluralism as a historical construct taught us, whether that be from Prophet Muhammad himself and some of the lessons and the teachings and frankly actions of his or other historical figures of different faiths? What has history kind of taught us about the import and the necessity for religious pluralism?
Yeah, so you can make history do anything you want it to, right? And there are moments of religious domination in history, and there's moments of inspiring interfaith cooperation. I mean, I think that Rasulullah's time, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, the Constitution of Medina, the decisions at Hudaybiyah, the standing up for a Jew during the funeral of a Jew, the sending Jafar to Abyssinia to meet with the Negus, the Christian king. I mean, and for me, there's a lot within the history of early Islam, the Prophet's time, that speaks to the power of religious pluralism. And there's so much else also. There's the Emperor Ashoka, there's the Emperor Akbar in the Indian tradition. There's, of course, Gandhi. There's Martin Luther King Jr. and him marching with Abraham Joshua Heschel and Selma. Heschel saying, "Our legs were praying." King's nominating Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist monk, for a Nobel Peace Prize, the only person he ever nominates for a Nobel Peace Prize. So a lot of what I do in my talks is I tell stories of interfaith cooperation in history. And I think one of the remarkable things about the United States, even in acknowledging the sins and mistakes at the founding, was that this is the first democracy to believe that people from different religions, people praying to God in different ways, could come together and build a nation, right? It's the first attempt at a religiously diverse mass democracy. And that's a tradition to be proud of in the United States, and it's worth building on.
We talked about some of the bumpy roads that this religious pluralism project, if I can call it that, fairly call it that, has kind of unearthed throughout American history. But I want to kind of go back to a little bit more of history. When we talk about our current standing as Muslims in North America, this is not necessarily a first for us, if that's fair to say. And I should ask you, because this is something that we've struggled with, but it's also been something that other communities of faith have struggled with, whether you're a Catholic in certain parts of the world or Jewish in other parts of the world. So can you talk to us about, maybe as we look at the overall arc of combating Islamophobia in the Western world, what we might take from other historical cases of our brothers and sisters of other faiths?
Yes. So, geek that I am, I've actually written 2 books on this, Sacred Ground and a book called Out of Many Faiths, where I spent a lot of time comparing the contemporary Muslim experience to the Catholic experience. And, the great historian Arthur Schlesinger once said that a bias against Catholics is the deepest bias in the American people. And if you think about just how ugly anti-Black racism has been in the United States, how ugly the genocide of Native Americans has been, I mean, for a historian of Schlesinger's caliber to say that anti-Catholicism is the deepest bias is saying something. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's certainly worth taking into consideration. And Islamophobia looks a lot like anti-Catholic bias, which is basically making monsters of a religious minority that people knew very little about. Look, in the 1850s, the Know Nothing Party was an entirely anti-Catholic party. That was basically the only plank in its platform, and they had 75 members elected to the U.S. Congress. 75 members, right? Entire state legislatures were elected that were Know Nothing members, and it is worth pointing out, America metabolized its anti-Catholicism. Joe Biden is a Catholic. He is part of a not so long ago marginalized minority. In 1928, a man named Al Smith, first Catholic to run for president of the United States on a major party ticket, his candidacy was tanked by anti-Catholic forces. In 1960, John F. Kennedy almost lost the presidential race because of anti-Catholic forces. Joe Biden is the first Catholic president since John F. Kennedy, the second total. And we almost in the United States never talk about what it took for us to overcome our anti-Catholicism. I take from this actually a great deal of inspiration that America has the ability to metabolize at least some of its prejudices. And I actually think that Muslims are because of the work that Muslims have done and other people against racism and Islamophobia have done, Muslims have made significant progress in the United States in the last 20 years. The number of highly public Muslim figures, the amount that you see Muslims on television and commercials and other kinds of shows. A friend of mine, Robert Jones, runs something called the Public Religion Research Institute, and he said in the last year is the first time that over half of people said that Muslims can be good Americans. This is in polling of a wide swath of Americans. I mean, I think because of the work that we've done, the future looks good.
Yeah, you make some really interesting points with the historical comparisons. And, I think I was reading some research recently, which you might be familiar with it, I'm sure you are, which was, the number one factor to kind of cool the temperatures on Islamophobia for certain populations was, did they know someone who was Muslim? Had they ever interacted with someone who was actually Muslim? And I think that kind of, dialed down the othering or the mystery of what these, with this group of people that people kind of had associated with certain markers that they may have seen on social media or on particular television networks as being, stereotypically attributed to these groups. This reminds me of something very similar that I heard your fellow scholar Reza Aslan talk about in a talk I'd heard recently, where he was mentioning, how did we go from a 50-year period where, the amount of anti-Semitism was unimaginable to now having Judeo-Christian values? And a theory he posited was, in that case, the Jewish community was very strong and strategic, but also mindful of standing up for other people, not just ensuring that it was just their own cause or their own sort of quote-unquote survival and thriving that they were standing up for. I just wanted to kind of get your take on that, since we're on that sort of historical comparators, to see if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no. First of all, Reza and I are friends, and he's right in a lot of things, and he's certainly right on that. I think it's absolutely the case that one of the reasons that we've progressed with regards to anti-Semitism is because Jews made it clear that they weren't just for themselves. And Muslims have done a lot more of that in the last 10 or 20 years, is to say that we are about building American pluralism and not just about advancing Muslims or the cause of Islam. By the way, building pluralism is very much a Muslim value, right?
Right. Tell me about, let's fast forward a bit to your time. You mentioned Barack Obama. Maybe I'll start with how you got to know Barack Obama as a fellow Chicago native yourself. What was the initial relationship like, and then let's get into the work that you do with them, and perhaps the goals that you had when you joined the council that was facilitated by him.
Yeah. So here's an interesting truth. I don't know Barack Obama at all. I shook his hand a couple times in the course of the time I spent on the advisory council, and in the course of time I spent working with the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Affairs. But I got to know one of President Obama's aides when he was in his Senate office, a guy named Joshua Dubois, and when Joshua was named the head of the Faith Office, Joshua needed to put together a faith council, and part of what President Obama instructed Joshua to do was to make sure that it was religiously diverse and it was generationally diverse, and there were some people focused on practical projects. And because I had met Josh literally once when he was in the Senate office, I guess I must have come to mind. And so the next thing I know, I'm in the Oval Office with the new president of the United States, shaking his hand under the picture of President Lincoln, and he is giving this speech about the importance of people from different religions working together and young people being involved. And I remember I had the temerity to raise my hand and say, President Obama, I run an organization that does precisely that. And he said, well, that's why you're on this council, and we're going to make sure that we do some practical projects together. And so that was the beginnings of the president's Interfaith and Community Service Challenge. But it was a lot of luck, honestly. It was a lot of luck. And I was, 30 at the time, maybe 32 that I got appointed. I just had no idea at the time how fortunate I was, right? To be in a White House, to be in the Oval Office with the first Black president of the United States, to be in the Roosevelt Room, putting a report on the table that advocated for a set of things, several of which became reality, to work with the president's political appointees on the advancement of a concrete project that built pluralism.
That's an incredible story. And also, you're way too humble.
I'm not being humble. I just got lucky. you should do things with your luck, and I think that I have done things with my luck, but I just got lucky.
Totally. And thank you for sharing that like very personal sort of story of the inside look of being in that administration, on that council. Tell me about some of the work there. What was your, it was 2008, 2010, around that time?
Yes. 2000. So the election was in November 2008. The inauguration was January 19th or 20th, 2009. I got the phone call maybe 2 weeks later that I'd been appointed to the council, and sometime mid-February, I was in the Oval Office, and then we had our first meeting, and off we went. I mean, so here's the big thing I would tell you, Zain. Sitting around the council table, I noticed that there were a set of people who were much more senior. I mean, I was the youngest person on the council by a long shot at that time. The only other person who was even close to me age-wise was the other Muslim, my friend Dalia Mogahed. So we're sitting around with all these senior religious figures. They had opinions on everything, right? On economic policy and climate policy, et cetera, and it became clear to me that I did not have the standing to have opinions on everything. But I led an organization that ran practical projects, that we had an actual concrete network of college students and college chaplains and college faculty that was doing interfaith service on college campuses. And that if I played my cards strategically, the White House could be a partner on projects along those lines. And that's precisely what happened. So I chose to use the limited airtime that I had in that council of very senior religious leaders to talk about a couple of concrete projects that my organization could help to advance. And because people got accustomed to me only saying that, they would turn to me after a while and say, yeah, you know what, we should actually try to make that happen. We could do that. And then we did.
Tell me about some of those projects, if you don't mind.
So, what the biggest thing that we did was the umbrella program was the President's Interfaith Campus and Community Service Challenge, and it brought together people from 500 campuses. What does the White House do? It convenes people, right? So we convened every year at the White House, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who were interested or committed to interfaith service on campuses. And then we worked with the White House to develop a series of awards for campuses that were doing the work especially well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my organization basically staffed the whole thing. So I would say it doubled our movement, because all of a sudden the President of the United States is sending an email to every college president in the country inviting them or their representative to a conference in Washington, D.C. on interfaith service.
That's awesome. That's really, really incredible. Let's move on to a bit around, maybe practicality for the Jamaat, right? People are listening. This has been a delightful conversation. Thank you again for having it with us, genuinely. It's been really illuminating to not just understand the projects you've worked on and kind of what's directed you to this career, but how you've rooted in historical sort of backing and kind of ensuring that we take some of those lessons of history and ensure that they're applied to how we try to collectively solve maybe the problem in front of us, which is to enhance the religious pluralism and ensure that we combat Islamophobia. If I'm sitting at home watching this as a Jamaati member, what sort of practical advice would you have for me? How do I kind of first dip my toe or maybe kind of jump in to maybe engaging with this sort of work of combating Islamophobia, but also ensuring a more robust religious pluralism in our two countries?
So I think that there's a set of kind of mental exercises we can do on a personal level. So, you ask yourself the question, what do I know about other religions that inspires me? We're going to disagree on doctrine. Let's just, that's a given. You're going to disagree on doctrine. What do you know about other religions that inspires you? Specifically, Can you cite scripture? Can you offer can you cite a historical figure? Can you note a specific teaching? So just to kind of, that's what we call the knowledge base of interfaith cooperation at IFYC. And a lot of this is on our website, ifyc.org. We've got, cool videos and curricula, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things we start with is, what do you know about another religion that's inspiring to you? Here's a second question. Can you cite instances in which people from different religions have worked together in ways that have benefited all of us? And of course, there's kind of there's kind of grand ones like the civil rights movement in the United States, or the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, or Hind Swaraj in India. But there's also really everyday ones. So, for example, in disaster relief, right? Disaster relief, at least in the United States, and really in the international community as well, is an effort of a lot of faith communities who have created disaster relief arms. Of course, we as Smileys have done the same with Focus. And in the midst of a massive disaster, an earthquake, a hurricane, etc., those faith communities are working together. That is an excellent example of diverse religions highlighting a shared value, which is helping others and coordinating in very concrete ways to make people's lives better at a time when those people really need their lives to be better. So running through those kinds of things in your head are kind of learning the knowledge base of that, very important. And then you ask yourself the question, what can we do? What can Ismailis be involved in at a Jamaati level that is interfaith in nature? And I think the answer to that is probably interfaith service, right? Is partnerships with churches and mosques and gurdwaras and temples and synagogues, etc., bringing people together to engage in service projects. It's, we believe in pluralism, and we are highly organized as a community, and service is a part of our ethic. Much of that service takes place within the community. A significant amount that goes beyond the community takes place through the Aga Khan Development Network. Is there a way that we as Smileys can build an infrastructure of participation in interfaith service efforts that is not just through the AKDN?
I want to hone in on this a bit more and maybe go a step further around maybe youth, right? People who are seeing your story and kind of what it's led to in terms of the projects and the trajectory, but also youth living in a very different time in our two countries, right? Black Lives Matter, a very public fight for racial and social justice. What advice would you kind of have for them as they try to maybe advance their careers or try to make this more integral into how they live their lives? So even if it isn't a particular career path, it seems to be so embedded in the zeitgeist that we're continuing the fight and the struggle on these items. What advice would you have for them and the energies that they would bring to the table?
I'm an incrementalist. I'm temperamentally moderate. Black Lives Matter is a movement that says there are huge parts of the system that are rotten and that need to change. And I stand in awe of their courage and of their victory over the summer, right? I mean, Black Lives Matter won. They won this summer. I'm in the United States because a radical movement called the Civil Rights Movement said that huge parts of the system are rotten. Why is that relevant to me? Because that movement doesn't just extinguish segregationist laws domestically in the United States, it also changes immigration law. And so you have the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1965. You also have the Immigration Act of 1965, which ends legalized racism in U.S. immigration policy. Prior to 1965, the only immigrants the United States legally let in were immigrants that were, quote, culturally similar, white Europeans. The Civil Rights Movement helps to end that racist immigration policy. Hence, people from South Asia, from Africa, from South America are allowed to come in. We as Smileys benefit from that radical movement. Everybody from the Black Baptists of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to the Black Muslims of the Nation of Islam and the Black Panther movement. I am not saying that we have to be radical in that way. I'm only saying that we benefit from those movements, and it is high time we acknowledge that.
So, what if there's a cohort within our community? Let me thank you for being so straight up. A cohort within our community that says, we have seen the successes of history and religious pluralism and what it means in terms of value and in terms of what a good, just society can mean. But we've also seen a movement, literally a live wire movement going forward that has had a small V victory, but has shown how quickly and radically can take advantage of a moment. So the question I have for you is there any sense of using your term radicalism applied to how we combat Islamophobia, or do we have to do the incremental brick building in your mind? And I appreciate you telling me where you're coming from as well, and I think that's thank you for being honest with that. But I'd just love to get your take around how you maybe reconcile the need for now versus the long arc of history approach that we've discussed earlier.
So you are always going to need builders. You're always going to need. It is one thing to highlight how rotten a system is, but once it's highlighted, you need people who can build another system or improve the current one. And so I'm proud of being a builder. I'm not much of a radical. As I said, I certainly have that in my past, and I admire it in other people now, but it's not who I am. I'm a builder, and there's very, very few people in history who are both. So Mandela runs a revolution and he builds a nation. George Washington runs a revolution and builds a nation. There's not that many others, right? Gandhi ran a revolution and then Nehru built the nation. And of course, I'm only talking about kind of top level people here. But if you one of the great lines in Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton is from George Washington, winning is easy, governing is harder, right? So I am a governor. I'm a builder.
Well, that's fascinating. So many nuggets of wisdom in there. Let me end on these two final notes. The first one is you've talked about your inspirations and kind of where your ideals have come from around this work that you're doing. Tell me about Maulana Hazrat Imam's words and writings and overall comments on pluralism and how they've impacted you, and both from how you approach the work, but to also the drive that it is meant for you and the work itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's central, his vision. I mean, I get emotional thinking about it, right? Like his vision, his patience, his ability to build, right? Laying the foundation stone at Aga Khan University in 1971, exactly 1,000 years after the beginnings of Al-Azhar. So there is a mix here between civil society and pluralism, and you have to build institutions, universities, hospitals, arts programs, economic development initiatives. You have to build institutions that model pluralism, and that's what he's done. And he is willing to be patient, right? It's a very special office. You don't get turned out after 4 years. You are able to work over the course of, in his case, 60, 70 years, mashallah. And you're able to think to yourself, what I'm building now will continue to be talked about 1,000 years hence.
Yeah, that's incredible. And the final question I have for you is maybe, getting you to paint a picture, right? We've talked about the struggles, the bumpy road that was this recent past in American history. Paint me a picture of what it looks like, a world or a society where we embrace religious pluralism, where we embrace this as a construct. What could that, if we're trying to end on that note of, painting that picture to someone who says, I don't really know if I understand the value, tell me what this could look like. Should we embrace these values and from your perspective, embrace projects that extend these values as a society going forward?
Yeah. So it would be woven into the fabric of our institutions, and the way you would know that is in our calendars. So, every Jamaat Khana, just like every synagogue and church and mosque and gurdwara and secular humanist society and sangha, would have it just as part of its calendar on a weekly or monthly basis. This is our diverse clergy have their meetings on Friday mornings, and young people have their interfaith service projects on Sunday nights, and there's a women's interfaith meeting on Saturday evenings, and once a month the mayor leads an interfaith service project, et cetera. Every campus has an interfaith service group. It just would be woven in, just like various majlises and kushyalis are woven into the fabric of Jamaati life now. Similarly, you would just have interfaith efforts woven into the fabric of the faith community, and people would be able to articulate their theology of interfaith cooperation. People would know a series of interfaith heroes. It would be part of the standard knowledge base and narrative of our lives.
And Eboo, what would you say to those, the growing number of folks that say they don't practice a faith, or they don't maybe have a faith to practice? How does that reconciliation happen in your mind?
I mean, they're part of this too. They're very much a part of pluralism as well. Absolutely a part of pluralism, whether they have decided to become secular humanist or whether they're on a kind of a spiritual journey. Pluralism is for everybody.
What a great note to leave on. Eboo, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate this delightful chat, and I hope to do it again soon.
God willing. Thank you, inshallah. Thank you for having me.
Eboo, thank you for that wonderful conversation and those generous insights that you shared with the Jamaat. I know we could have kept that conversation going for much, much longer. I should mention, however, that Eboo has agreed to speak to our Jamaat again. So on December 29th, mark the date, circle the calendar, send a text message to yourself, boomerang, a carrier pigeon, whatever you do. On December 29th, Eboo has agreed to do a community reading of his book, Acts of Faith. It's a book that talks about struggling with identity, struggling with faith, being a Muslim in America, and he'll be doing a community reading for us as a Jamaat, for us to discuss the book, to talk about the book, to really dig deeper on some of the big strands that are present in the book. So while we're off on holidays and enjoying our time with our friends and family, why not pick up a book and talk about it, and we get to do so with the author. So mark down that date, December 29th. We'll have more details coming soon to join Eboo Patel in his book, Acts of Faith. And now, before we move on to the long-awaited musical expressions, I wanted to remind you that it's time to renew your participation in the Burial Plan Drive, which launches today and closes on December 20th. Now, as many people in the Jamaat know, this is an initiative by which Jamaati members share the burden and cost to support each other during a difficult time, and is one of many examples of our Jamaat being stronger by working together. This year, due to the pandemic, registration in Jamaat Khana has been suspended. Instead, Jamaati members will be able to safely register by visiting iicanada.org/burialplan. Once again, iicanada.org/burialplan. That starts today. And should you require additional information or assistance, you can speak to a volunteer by calling the access line at 1-888-536-3599. We look forward to your support, and once again, the burial plan launches today, so you can sign up for the 2021 calendar year starting today. It is now time to close out Friday Night Reflections like we always have, with a musical expression to rejuvenate the soul and to capstone the week that has just passed us. My name is Zain Belgi. It has been such a distinct pleasure to be your host again for Friday Night Reflections. Even though I can't see you on the other side of the screen, I hope you're keeping well, staying healthy, enjoying the time that you can with your family, and we will inshallah see you next week on Friday Night Reflections. Take care, and Yali Madad.
सजनिया प्रीतम घर नहीं आए, आए बाली उमर मोरी रैन